If you are considering filing your first ever VA disability claim, the most important thing you can do next is ask yourself one simple question. What makes you think that you have a service-connected disability? Now, if you can answer that question, then we're already off to a good start. But if you're a little confused by that question, then that might be the reason why you need to stop, do a little bit of preparation, and set yourself up for success for all your further dealings with the VA. And I'm here to break it down for you. Okay, so there are a number of pathways that a veteran can be service connected. There are different situations which would lead the VA to say, okay, this veteran's condition was caused or aggravated by service. One of the easiest that we look for, especially with our Vietnam vets or our veterans who deployed during the Gulf Wars, are what are called presumptive. A presumptive condition is where the government presumes that that condition was caused by exposure to toxins, let's say. Let's use Agent Orange, for example. When veterans came back from Vietnam soon after the war, there was no Agent Orange presumptive list in the VA. They had to fight, and through court action and through changes in law, the government finally said, you know, there's enough scientific evidence that the toxins used, the herbicides and things like that, that were in the combat zone were most likely the cause of some of these conditions. And you've heard of them before, like diabetes, type 2 ischemic heart disease, prostate cancer, Parkinsonism, bladder cancer, and it goes on and on. And that list increases from time to time as the government adds more to that list. So it's not static. So the first thing I would do when I meet a veteran is ask them about their service. Hey, where did you serve? When did you serve? And that kind of helps me determine if they fall into a category of someone that might have had exposure to a presumptive, or they may have a presumptive condition based on exposure through the where and when did you serve question. So the Vietnam veterans, the ones who served in Vietnam, near Vietnam, like our Blue Water Navy sailors who served within 12 nautical miles, some Thailand air bases, things like that, are considered exposed by location and time. The same is true of Marines who served at Camp Lejeune up until 1987, or our Gulf War veterans who served in Southwest Asia. There are lists out there, and I'll provide links where you can find them, where they are considered exposed. And if they have those conditions, if they have a diagnosis, they have a DD-214 and a diagnosis, the government says, there's your nexus. It's presumptive. So that's a simple, relatively straightforward claim. Now, there are many, many veterans who may have been injured in training or has served during peacetime and are not going to be in a presumptive type situation more often than not. It's not a black and white disqualifier. It just means that there are other avenues that we should talk about to service connection. The next one is direct service connection. So direct service connection sounds like what that word means. There's something in your records that indicates you were injured by a tank. Your foot was run over and you've never been the same. And you have, reams of paperwork from your service treatment records. You still see a private doctor or maybe a VA doctor now. You have to treat that injury. There's been no break in the, no pun intended, there's been no break between the injury and who you are now and what you've been dealing with it in terms of prescriptions and prosthetics or what have you. So a direct claim is exactly that. I'm claiming something, it's in my records, it's not presumptive, but I have evidence that it was caused or aggravated in service. VA does a few different things to see if there's a direct relationship to service connection. They will reach out for your service treatment records, usually through National Archives. They'll pull your personnel record. They'll grab the government records. If they don't have them, they'll ask you if you have a copy, but they're going to make that first attempt to electronically pull those records into your claims file. And I, as a veteran service officer, if I represent you or your local county veteran service officer representing you, they can eventually see that information populating your claims file through the federal system. So that's a good thing. Now, direct service connection is a little bit more difficult than presumption. In some cases where there isn't something as obvious as getting hit by a vehicle or injured in a training accident, they are going to try to look at your life before and after service and say, was your remaining time after service, or maybe even before service, was your civilian life more the cause of that issue, or was it your time in service? Let's take it in a different direction. Another way of getting service connected for an issue is if it's connected to another issue. So let's say in this claim, we're putting together the claim, we're talking about preparing for your first ever claim. Well, let's say in your decision 6 months or so from now, the VA says, we grant you, the veteran, a 30% rating for a lower back injury, a thoracic degenerative disc disease, or what have you. There's many different very specific conditions and diagnoses around the spine and the back. But let's say you're granted one of those. It's 30%. Great. But you notice you have tingling and loss of sensation in one or both of your legs. The VA, of course, has to have their own word for it. They'll call it a lower extremity. So you have tingling, a little bit of nerve damage, neuropathy, let's say, radiculopathy, and 5 or 6 years have passed since your first claim, and you come to someone like me and say, hey, Matt, I want to put a claim in for that, but how do I do that? Because my legs were fine when I was on active duty. Well, that can be considered a secondary service connection. And quite a few conditions are linked to other conditions that were originally claimed, and they are now secondary. So once a condition is granted by the VA, if there's anything downstream or related anatomically to that part of your body, it would make sense that your spine affects your extremities, upper or lower. Your arms and your legs can be affected by that over time with the compression of discs and things like that. You don't have to be a doctor to figure out that relationship. So that's a legitimate claim as well. So that's considered a secondary connection. So we've covered presumptive, we've covered direct, we've covered secondary. Okay, so now that we're starting to get a grasp of service connection, how the VA is going to look at your conditions or a condition in terms of granting service connection so that you can be rated, let's talk about the ratings. What does that mean to be rated? So if you have a service-connected condition as far as the VA is concerned and they've answered that question, well, then the next task for them is to look at the severity. One thing a lot of veterans don't do, which surprises me, is they don't take a moment, and it doesn't take very long, to review the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR. And I'll show you right where to go so it's easy to find. I'll have a link in the description. But moseying through the CFR can reveal quite a lot about how the VA views different conditions. They break it down by mental and physical, diseases of the skeletal system, endocrine, digestive, all those types of things. So you can find the broad category, and then you can look for your diagnosis. So if you have a diagnosed condition, you can Control F or Command F, find that word and quickly pull that out of the CFR. When you look at a condition, it has a rating code, it has a name, and then it has a percentage to the right-hand side as you read it. Some conditions have multiple degrees of severity and multiple percentages after them. I mentioned tinnitus earlier, and tinnitus is one of the few limited conditions where they cap it off at 10%. It doesn't matter how severe the condition is, it doesn't matter if it's driving you absolutely crazy, 10% is the legal cap. And there's still veterans to this day who want to go back at the VA and say, I need an increase for tinnitus. When in reality, maybe they might have a mental health claim if this thing is truly tormenting them. So get educated on how the VA, their rating methodology. That's very, very important, because you may find out that you have a service-connected condition that's relatively minor, but it might get worse over time. It's worth doing, and you might be surprised at some of the other ones that have very quick, rapid increases in percentages like 30, 50, 70, 100%, which is very which can have quite an impact on your life and your compensation amount. Another thing you can do is be aware of the fact that 9 times out of 10, the VA is not going to take your word for anything, and they're going to verify everything. One way they do that is through those compensation and pension exams, those C&P exams. They're done by contract companies, so a company like QTC or Optum or VES will call you and or mail you a packet and invite you on behalf of the VA to go to an exam, a C&P exam. Now, these exams are not the same as going to your family doctor. These people are professional 9 times out of 10. They're going to be very pleasant. They're going to thank you for your service. They're going to ask you a series of questions, and then you're going to be out of their office in 7 minutes, scratching your head saying, that wasn't like any other kind of doctor's visit I've ever been to before. It was all business, and I was out the door. Correct. Because that's not their job. Their job is not to be your doctor. Their job is to determine, based on their medical training, and they're usually nurse practitioners, by the way, based on their medical training, they're going to determine whether they think there's a nexus, whether they think there's service connection, direct, presumptive, secondary, and they will provide that medical opinion to the VA. And someone up chain in the VA, a rater, will ultimately make a decision relying heavily on that medical opinion. So do you think you want to have the best possible experience going through a C&P exam? Yes, absolutely, you're right. So what are some of the things that we can do to increase our odds in our favor before we go to that C&P exam? Well, I'm glad you asked. The first thing I'd recommend is start getting comfortable writing things down, putting things in your cell phone or writing them on a list as they occur to you, because our memories are horrible. Do not rely on memory to have a successful claim. Rely on data, rely on evidence. One way we can develop additional evidence is through gathering our recent diagnoses, prognoses, medications that we're on, post-surgery notes, post-op notes. If you have imagery like MRIs or any other kind of imagery, the images are not as important to the VA as the doctor's impressions of those images. So those are important things to gather. So any kind of private medical evidence in your medical history, you want to start to look through. If you don't keep that stuff around, if you just kind of pay your bills and go about your life, that's understandable. Contact your doctors, see if you can get onto a patient portal where you can download a lot of that information as PDFs or even notes to your phone. Go get hard copies. If it's a little bit of money, believe me, it's worth it to have that information. And then look it over yourself with a highlighter pen and go through that and say, oh, I think I remember seeing that in that CFR that I read. I think that's what I've got. It's pretty much in the same category, and based on the doctor's notes, it looks like the doctor's even offered a medical opinion as to nexus. Maybe your doctor hasn't. Maybe that's a discussion you can have with your doctor. So get comfortable gathering your own medical evidence. Veterans who don't gather their medical evidence then have to ask the VA through a written form, through authorization. They are then asking the VA to go get their medical records for them. It adds months to the process many times, and they're blind to what the VA actually got. They don't know what their doctor, their specialist provided to the VA. So it is a method, but it's not the one I prefer. I always recommend getting your eyes on and analyzing and going over it with your VSO to make sure that you really know the conditions that you think you can defend service connection for. So get smart on your personal records. Keep that record I was talking about, that journal or those phone notes of how you're doing day to day. So besides just doctor visits, get used to quantifying the frequency and severity of flare-ups, of headaches, of times where your condition is limiting you. Does it change the way you work? Does it change your hobbies? Are you less active with your family? Are the things that you have to do to accommodate to deal with an instability in a joint or pain or things like that? So that answers the day-to-day question. Like when people say, "Hey, how are you doing?" This is a better way to tell the VA how you're doing. And if we provide that private medical evidence and you provide your own notes, then those are on record prior to your C&P exam. that's the best way to go through it, because the C&P examiner now has your information, and you know what that examiner is looking at as they're going through that questionnaire and filling in their medical opinion and their recommended rating to the VA. So own your claim from the beginning. Some other things you can do is you can actually look at those DBQs, or disability questionnaires. So a DBQ is publicly available on va.gov, and you can actually look at pretty much what that exam is going to look like. It's like seeing the test questions before you take the test. So you can be prepared that way. That can kind of focus your mind on what questions you need to answer, what kind of information you need to start to gather. So beat that one to death, I got it. But it's very, very important. Finally, if you think it's going to be a while before you can do all this, but you really want to get this claim started, one thing I recommend is doing an intent to file. To submit an intent to file, you can either make a phone call to the VA. If you don't have someone representing you, it's very easy. You dial 1-800-827-1000, identify yourself, verify your veteran status, and let them know that you want to submit an intent to file for compensation. If you use those words, intent to file for compensation, that starts your effective date of your claim. All right, so why do I like the intent to file? It's a great tool. It doesn't obligate you to do a formal claim. You don't have to know anything. You don't even have to know what conditions you're going to claim, but you know you're going to go in that direction. You don't want to waste any more time. That intent to file buys you 1 year to submit a claim. You don't have to submit a claim at the end of the year, but if you do submit a claim within that year, you have that earlier effective date. That earlier effective date can mean the difference in thousands of dollars of back pay when the claim process is finally complete, when you are notified, and if you're granted a rating of 10% or higher overall. You'll be very, very glad that you did the intent to file. Like I said, it can be done by phone. It can be done over the internet on va.gov. If someone like me is representing you, we can do that ourselves on your behalf. So keep that in mind. That's another way to take that anxiety level down. Realize you don't have to have all the answers, but it's a great way to buy you time to do the job right and not right now. So something to think about. In future videos, we're going to talk more about the actual process. We'll get into the different stages and all the movements that you'll go through from beginning to end for a formal process of a claim. But I don't want to overwhelm you right now. I just want to get you back into the mindset. No one's going to take your claim more seriously than you. Don't rely on the VA to do all the heavy lifting. There are things you could do up front, like we talked about. Review the DBQs, review the rating criteria, look for things that are possibly on the presumptive list. Put pad to paper or use your phone, but start to gather your own evidence. Don't rely on the VA to do all that for you, and you'll have a much better outcome. See you next video.